Hi, my name is Estelle, and my last name is Weyl, and the slides are going to be up at InStartLogic. That's the company I work for. InStartLogic, github.io, you remember that, and all the slides for all of my talks are there. And the reason I speak at conferences is because I am a Twitter whore. So that is my Twitter handle, EstelleWW. Follow me, that makes me happy. I also write books. If you have insomnia, they're great. I basically read specifications, so you don't have to. And my Flexbox book should be coming out in a few weeks. I work at InStartLogic, and we make websites fast. So let me get into my talk. This is an example of a website that I created. It's actually a marketing page that I created for OPhoto, which became Kodak Gallery, which was part of Kodak, which no longer exists, back in 2004. It's, or 2003 maybe. It's tableless, and this seems simple to do nowadays, but back in 2003 and 2004, this was my first framework. I had to check if it supported document get element by ID, or whether it supported document all or document layers to know if it supported JavaScript and simple functionality. The reason I created this framework was because I was supporting older versions of Netscape, older versions of IE. Anyone here work on Netscape 4.7? Aren't you glad you don't have to do that anymore? So the original purpose and goal of frameworks was to basically even out browsers. So we didn't have to code, so we didn't have to, every single time we make a function, code for every single different browser. Mostly for add event listener, that's why we had jQuery. And because it was attach event in IE, add event listener in every modern browser. That purpose is not as important anymore. I mean, it's important to even out browsers, but browsers are pretty even. Add event listener has been supported since IE 9. Get element, my class name, the selectors API, and class list. Class list didn't get supported till IE 10. It's a very easy function to code. But get attribute has been around since forever. So if you're just going to be doing something simple, do you really need a framework? So frameworks are good. I don't think that you shouldn't be using frameworks. I just don't think you should be using 6 frameworks at the same time. Frameworks enable you to write code really quickly to make it supported in every single browser. And it also allows you to gain the knowledge from 4,000 people instead of just yourself. There's someone who probably knows some features better than you do. For me, it's the performance of my JavaScript. I don't know much about JavaScript performance in terms of functions and which one's going to go faster. It allows you to do less code and to code faster. But I don't ever want to see anyone do this. And I've seen this. I've seen this so many times. Importing a framework or a library for something that the browser can simply do with one line of CSS. I have someone in the back laughing hysterically, and yes, that's a fireable offense. The way I view frameworks is kind of as a scaffolding. When I am prototyping, doing quick prototyping, I will include everything so I don't have to code everything myself. But I don't ship my 55,000 lines of code to production, because that is insane. So be wise when you're choosing frameworks. So kind of why am I harping on frameworks right now when this is an inclusive markup talk? Because I think the dependency that that some people have on frameworks means that they're not learning the basics of being a web developer. The downsides of relying on frameworks is you don't actually know the markup. You don't know some people don't know what they're putting into their browser. They don't understand what valid markup is. They're not fully cognizant of the semantics of every single element, and they don't even know what all the elements or attributes are. They're relying on their framework or library to do everything for them. They're not thinking about accessibility because they're told, oh, this framework improves accessibility. It only improves accessibility if you know how to make it accessible in the first place. Some people are arguing that you should just do inline CSS. I want to punch them in the face. I don't have an opinion on that. And then the other thing is the performance. Every time you include a line of JavaScript, which a framework is going to have many lines of JavaScript, and if you include many frameworks, you're going to have tons of lines of JavaScript. That JavaScript has to be downloaded, parsed, and executed. There's the download time, but there's also the parsing and execution time, which means your browser is basically not functional for your user. And it enables laziness, which I'm all for, but more on that later. So what do we not learn when we're using frameworks? Here are the HTML5 inputs and attributes. And this is a Firefox browser. And so we have people from Firefox in the room. Fix that now, please. But some of the other features are awesome and they're supported. And one of the best things that they do, like email and teletype, is they give the right keyboard when you're on a mobile device with a dynamic keypad, right? So you don't want, if you have, if you're looking for only numbers, do you really want to touch tiny little buttons, or do you want the telephone keypad? Okay. So there's also some attributes that people don't really learn about because they're letting their frameworks do everything for them. So learn the HTML input type. I actually have a 1.5-hour talk. There's a presentation online which is just a half hour if you want to learn all the form controls. It was from 2011 or 12. It's online. It's still the same stuff other than daytime. That would be on estelle.github.io. So this was a quote from a talk from Russ Weekly that he gave a few weeks ago, which was, many developers who have grown up using only frameworks have a total lack of understanding of the fundamental of HTML, such as valid and semantic markup. The main point of this quote, which I am reading to you even though you all know how to read, is, this is of great concern as semantic markup is one of the core principles of the accessible web. Semantic markup is one of the core principles of the accessible web, which means if you code semantically, your website is going to be, or your web app is going to be by default pretty much accessible. There are features that we can add to make it more accessible, but it's inaccessible in and of itself. So this is an example of an inaccessible website. This is not that we don't know what the text says because we are blind and we are accessing this website via a screen reader. And your content has really brilliant content, and the links all say, click here. Is this useful to someone using a screen reader? No. Click here for more information. More information about what? So code your content in a manner that is accessible so that just the links themselves provide enough information as to what you're going to get on the next page. Not only will people using assistive technologies be thankful, but Google is your biggest blind user, and Google will know WTF your next page is going to be talking about. This right here, is what the web looks like for people who are hearing impaired. Can anyone read this guy's lips? Even if you could read lips, I think this guy is talking too fast. I have no clue what he's saying. This is what it sounds like to someone who is hearing impaired, or to someone in this session who is watching a video right now instead of listening to me talk and doesn't have earpieces in. Or someone whose headset is broken. I broke mine on the plane, so this is exactly what the movies are going to be looking like on my way home on my 12-hour flight. And this is actually not the right colors to display color blindness, so most people should be able to read this even if they are colorblind, but it gives an idea of what color blindness might look like, and also different abilities or different cognitive abilities. Some people would not be able to read this. Make your websites clear, make your color contrast, make your colors contrast. So disability is something we talk about, but disability, what does that mean? Disability is a mismatch between your current state and what you are trying to access right now. So some of us are disabled, have different levels of disability. We're not, when we think about disability, we shouldn't just be thinking about people who are paraplegic or people who are fully blind. There are different levels. And what is your state right now when you're accessing this website? Mine is that my keypad right now is dirty, so I'm having a really hard time navigating. So I would prefer to tab. That's not really a disability, but it is a current disability because my state right now is not as perfect as it could be. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed 26 years ago in the United States. And since then, we've been having the best sidewalks ever. I can roll my suitcase everywhere. So something that was created for wheelchairs is used by bicycles. It's used by people pushing shopping carts and people pushing that thing in the middle that I don't ever want to have to push. So again, there's permanent disabilities, there's situational disabilities. We often think of disabilities as someone in a wheelchair, but if you're walking with stilettos, the sidewalks here in Berlin are really hard to use. Luckily, I don't own stilettos, but some people do. If you're outside looking at your phone or your computer, the sun's glare will make your computer harder to read. So when it does come to complete visual impairness, we have something called accessible rich internet applications, which is some attributes that we can add to our HTML to make it more accessible. We've had 3 accessibility guidelines. We've actually had more, but these are the ones that are most relevant to us. In 1998, we had WCAG 1, which were kind of rules to follow. WCAG 2 was in 2008, and it said basically, instead of being rules, it was basically say, make your website perceivable, understandable, operable. And then in just 2 years ago, they passed ARIA. And so ARIA is now a standard. And we can't read this because it's tiny. But the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA. If you can use a semantic element, use that instead. So ARIA should be a last resort. It should be the sprinkling of sugar. It should not be the basis of making your website accessible. And now that I increased the font, let's decrease it again. So frameworks say that they make your website accessible. They do if you know what you're doing. So frameworks enable accessible site creation, but they don't guarantee it. What you need to understand is the markup that you are creating. If you are using frameworks like React, you're creating a component. But what is the HTML that is being generated? Because browsers render HTML. They also render objects of all sorts of different types. But what your framework is creating is basically DOM nodes that the browser needs to render. You need to understand the output that your framework is generating. Another thing with using semantic HTML and not relying on frameworks is performance. So Stephen wrote, I remember when 3G was a primary mobile speed. The web was slow, but at least it was usable. And so now when it says 3G, it's completely useless. So what's going on? Is it your mobile device? In 2010, if you look right here, it says 702 kilobytes. That was your average website, 702. In August, on August 15th, when I grabbed the statistics, we have 2463. To make that more relevant, I made the radius 351% bigger and smaller to show you the relative radius size. Proportionally, in terms of area, it's this size. So if you look at the sizes, the distribution, it's not that far off. We do have a little bit more assets, but we have 3.5, like proportionally we have about the same, but we have 3.5 times the size. And JavaScript, which is right here, has increased more than 351%. We're almost at 400%. So the reason I'm harping on this is because I've worked at places where they do RDD. RDD stands for resume-driven development. It's when you stick in every single framework so you can put it on your resume instead of thinking about what you're doing. So, the problem with RDD is when you create 55,000 lines of JavaScript, you have to send it down the pipes. When you're on a mobile network, that's really slow. When you are on a device with 512 megs of RAM, that makes life miserable. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to think outside the box and think about the markup that they're making. So I'm going to give an example. This is the Visa checkout. It is a form. It has a background image that repeats and the Visa logo, and that's pretty much it for assets in terms of media. But it has 55,000 lines of JavaScript. So when I kept saying 55,000, I was actually referring to this form. It takes a password, an email address, a checkbox, with a submit button and a link. So let's look at the performance of that. It takes 8 seconds to load, right? And DOM content loaded takes almost a half second, because that's how many JavaScript functions are being executed and created on load. It's thrashing the CPU, and it has all of this time during which nothing is happening, because that's actually when the website is being built. So the website is visually there, but it's not interactive. The user can't use it for 4 seconds. So what did I do? I recreated this website that 14 people are working on for over a year and a half in under 3 weeks, in 1,000 lines of JavaScript, 1,000 lines of CSS, and HTML, because this is a form. It should be HTML instead of 41 dependencies. My performance, a little under a second. You can't really tell the difference in this slide, so let me show you this one, where you see that I've loaded in 1 second, and they've loaded at 3.5. At 4 seconds, you see it. At 8 seconds, it's interactive. And here, this is my version. This is their version. So a few features that this has. I can open this up and select a country, and the icon changes. I can do that. Well, that's not really important. But here, there's a carousel. I can click here. I can right and left arrow. It's all nice and good. So let me show you, by thinking outside the box, how I reduced this from 55,000 lines to 1,000 lines without needing a framework. And the point is to just encourage you to think. The point of these examples is to encourage you to think just a little bit outside the box and say, oh, if I actually thought about how different ways of creating this widget, then maybe I could do that. So here is an input mask that they used. And you put in the day, right? And it masks it. It keeps the numbers there. And it keeps it there in black because they're actually changing the value. So this is an inaccessible input mask that requires the pulling in of jQuery and the plugin. So you're talking about 66, 67 K of JS. And they're pulling in jQuery just so they can use this plugin and for cookies. And the thing with cookies is who's written a cookie, set cookie in under 5 lines of JavaScript? Do you need a framework for that? No. So they're pulling in jQuery basically so that they can pull in this plugin. So I recreated this, and here it is. And notice that my mask is pink, and hopefully it works, because, yeah. And so it functions the same way. I'm just entering numbers here. And here's a Canadian zip code, and it accepts, it actually has a title attribute, which says a 6-character alphanumeric zip code in the format of A1A, 1A1. So it's accessible, because that tooltip is for people who are sighted. Fully accessible, and it says 2 kilobytes. It's now up to 3 kilobytes. So that's a little, but I can change it, and I can make the mask a different color if I want to. How did I do this? I used HTML. So the developer just needs to use Semantic HTML. A label, always use a label when you have a form control. Input, type zip, type tel. Why did I use tel? Because the zip code in the United States goes from 0001 to 99999. I don't want a little widget to go up and down, but I do want the number keypad. And then I have a pattern, because it has to match a pattern, and this is actual attribute in HTML5. And then I have the title attribute for sighted users as a tooltip. How does it work? I have a little script that puts a shell around it, puts a mask with an I element and the placeholder attribute right there. And as the person types in, the I updates to the current value, and the placeholder shrinks. So the user has entered 1, 2, 3, and the I says 1, 2, 3, and then the XX is still there. The I is actually transparent. It's just thinking outside the box a little bit, putting a span and making part of that span transparent. And that's all it was. And that creates a mask. So instead of using 66K, I added a feature to make it more accessible for sighted users and to not make it inaccessible for assistive technology users. So here is the JavaScript function that basically creates that, and you'll see it's pretty small. And the styling is just making it invisible by using either color transparent, opacity 0, or visibility hidden. That's it, pretty simple. So a little bit about form controls. To make them accessible, put the label. Put a label with a for attribute that matches the ID of your form control. If you want to sprinkle ARIA onto it, if you want to have more than one label, you can actually write an ARIA label and write exactly what you want the screen reader to read. Or you can use multiple labels by basically saying ARIA labeled by and putting more than one form control. But definitely just put the label. That's all you really need to do. The other two above it are added sugar. If you forget the label, it will read the placeholder. If you forget the placeholder, it will read the title. If you forget all of those, you should not be a web developer because your site is not accessible. OK. So there's a failed example of it on the Visa. Visa did use that script. And the reason it's failed is because they put it into a React component, and the React doesn't maintain the value. So the screen reader basically needs to be fed the value because it's not native because they're using React. I don't know enough about React to know what they screwed up on because I haven't actually looked at their code. So here is the carousel that they did. And I am going to use the keyboard. I'm going to tab into it. And you see the first dot is highlighted. And I'm going to use right and left arrows. And this is a carousel. Works like a carousel, acts like a carousel. This was their version. They used a button with options, with a div of role option, with data carousel, and all of this non-semantic stuff. What I used was a label with a field set, with an unordered list of labels, and 2 radio inputs. Or 5, actually. I just put a shortened version. So they had this much code. I'm using my hands to say 3 feet of code. I have about ½ a foot of code. Because I use Semantic HTML, including field set up here, so the field set will actually be read to the user. It'll say select an address to edit. And all of this is semantic. And I didn't have to code any JavaScript to make this function except for one line, which is set the attribute of the parent to a new class, which sets the left-hand side, or the transform, or translate property. That's all. It's 3 lines of JavaScript to make that work. So that's thinking a little bit outside the box. So is it a carousel? It is a carousel in that it has the right structure, functionality, there is animation that's controllable, and all the content is available to all the users. The interesting thing is, it is not a carousel. I cannot call it a carousel because people who actually use carousel screen readers will say, but wait, this thing works. I have all the information that I want. I didn't need to actually use JavaScript to say the page has been updated, because if you use a carousel, you have to update the page whenever it's updated and tell the user, the screen reader user, this has been updated. The version that I have it's just an unordered list of elements. It's just an unordered list of radio buttons with a label. It's all there. So I called it merry-go-round, which is basically a carousel, but with a different name. So there's a repo for it, a GitHub repo at my GitHub, but it's really just 3 lines of JS. So it's weird to have a GitHub repo for 3 lines of JS. So I'm going to cover one more thing, which is this country selector right here. And the country selector doesn't actually have a repo because it uses no JavaScript. So this was Visa's version, and it uses sections and dividus. Section, role, option, tab index, blah, 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 blah. Again, it's an unordered list of countries. You select the radio button that matches the country, and all it does is change the class to checked. I mean, the CSS changes it to input, checked is true. And that's how I style it. So there's no lines of JavaScript in this, so I couldn't actually create a repo, but I'm going to create a repo. Nothing fancy in the CSS. The only thing that's fancy is the footer that it was in. Scales open and close when you change. So there is one line of CSS, JavaScript for this example, which opens and closes the footer on change, and that's all it does. So what is the point of all of this? Oh, forgot to say one thing. I showed you some examples of semantic HTML replacing ARIA, right? I just use semantic HTML, it works. Screen readers will understand it. When you do need it, ARIA does exist. So I'm not saying don't use ARIA, I'm saying think outside the box and use ARIA when it's necessary. So instead of using the new shiny resume filler, think outside the box. Because as web developers, these are the features that we actually need to know and that are hard to learn and that take years to master. And these are not the things that I find on job descriptions. When I see a job description, I see 5 years of React, even though React's been around for like 2.5 years. But the fundamentals of HTML, that is really, really important. The fundamentals of CSS, understanding the cascade, understanding the inheritance, it's really not that difficult, but it's something that a lot of people have never really thought about. Knowing the JavaScript fundamentals, which enable you to understand what your framework is doing. And then everything on this side, on the right side, progressive enhancement. All of these features worked, and the entire deck works if there's no JavaScript or CSS that comes out. Understanding accessibility, performance, security, these take a long time to learn, and they're not the focus of the hack reactors necessarily. They might be. That would be a great hack reactor. So when you put out a job description, include everything on the right, realizing that people can always learn a framework. But understanding what their framework is producing is a real and true skill that I think that's why we're at the conference, so that we can all get those skills. So thank you very much.